The morning my son told me he had emptied my bank account and sold my house, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I laughed. A deep, uncontrollable laugh that startled even me. Because the moment he said those words, I realized something he didn't. My son had just ruined his own life. My name is Margaret Lawson. I'm 63 years old, widowed for 4 years, and according to most people in my town, I'm nothing special. Just a quiet woman who works part-time at the Willow Creek Community Library, helping people find books and organizing dusty shelves. But people rarely know the whole story. Before my son was born, I spent 15 years working in a legal firm. I wasn't a lawyer, but I was the person who prepared contracts, checked documents, and helped lawyers build fraud cases. You learn a lot doing that job. Especially how easily people think they can get away with things. My husband Daniel died in a highway accident 12 years ago. After that, life became simpler. Just me and my son, Ethan. At least, that's what I believed. 3 months before everything fell apart, Ethan started asking unusual questions. It was late July, the day after my birthday. We were sitting on my porch drinking lemonade when he said casually, "Mom, have you ever thought about letting me help manage your finances?" I raised an eyebrow. Why would I need help? "Well," he said, shrugging, "you live alone now. What if you forget bills or something?" I laughed. "I'm 63, Ethan. Not 90. He smiled, but his voice softened. "Dad always told me to look after you." That sentence made my chest tighten. So I agreed to give him access to my everyday checking account, the one I used for groceries, utilities, and small expenses. It usually had around $5,000 in it. What Ethan didn't know was that my savings account, the one holding nearly $140,000, was separate. Old habits die hard, especially when you've spent years watching fraud cases unfold in courtrooms. About a month later, Ethan brought his girlfriend to dinner. Her name was Claire. She was beautiful in a sharp, polished kind of way. The type of woman who noticed expensive furniture before she noticed people. During dinner, she kept looking around my house. "This neighborhood is beautiful," she said, glancing at the windows. "Homes here must be worth a fortune." I shrugged. "I've never checked." Ethan quickly changed the subject. But later that evening I heard something that made me uneasy. Claire had stepped into the hallway to make a phone call. Our house carries sound in strange ways. And I heard her whisper clearly, "Yeah, his mom has money. The house alone must be worth at least $500,000. My hands froze in the sink. Then she said something colder. "When she's gone, Ethan inherits everything anyway." I heard Ethan's voice quickly interrupt. "Claire, lower your voice." But the damage was already done. That night, I felt the first flicker of doubt. Still, I pushed the thought away. Because believing your child might betray you is a thought no parent wants to entertain. 2 weeks later, Ethan emailed me several documents. Just routine paperwork, he said. Insurance and legal stuff. At the time, I had been recovering from a severe flu. High fever. Weak and exhausted. I barely remembered signing anything. Then came Sunday morning. My usual routine was simple: coffee, laptop, check my accounts. When the banking page loaded, I frowned. Savings account balance: $800. I blinked. The previous week it had contained $139,000. My heart began pounding. Then my phone rang. Ethan. "Mom." "Great news," he said happily. "Claire and I are getting married tomorrow." My throat tightened. "Ethan, my bank account." "Oh, that," he said casually. "Yeah, I transferred the money. Claire and I needed a down payment for a condo and the wedding. You took $139,000. Well, technically," he said confidently, "you signed power of attorney documents." My hands trembled. Then he said the sentence that made me laugh. "Oh, and Mom, I sold your house yesterday." That's when I leaned back in my chair and laughed until tears rolled down my cheeks. Because Ethan had made a very big mistake. "Ethan," I said calmly, "I don't live in the house you sold." Silence filled the phone. And for the first time, my son sounded afraid. Because the property he sold? It wasn't mine. It belonged to someone else under a legal trust agreement, which meant my son hadn't just stolen my money. He had just committed a crime that could send him to prison. And his wedding was in less than 24 hours. What Ethan didn't know yet was that by tomorrow morning, his perfect wedding would begin turning into a disaster he could never undo. After Ethan hung up, the house felt unnaturally quiet. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the bank screen that now showed only $800 where my life savings used to be. Most people might have panicked. But strangely, I felt calm. Maybe it was because of my old legal training. When something serious happens, emotion only clouds your judgment. Evidence and patience are what matter. So instead of crying, I opened my filing cabinet. Inside was a thick folder labeled Lawson Family Trust. I pulled out the deed. The house I lived in, 214 Cedar Hollow Road, wasn't owned by me personally. Years earlier, after my husband Daniel died, a lawyer friend had advised me to place the property inside a family trust. It was meant to protect the house from legal issues, debts, and, well, situations exactly like this. The trustee listed on the document wasn't me. It was a small legal firm in Riverton, which meant something very simple. Ethan never had the authority to sell the property. Not legally. I exhaled slowly. Then I checked my email. Sure enough, there was a forwarded message from Ethan from 2 days earlier. Property sale documents. Urgent signature needed. I opened the attachment. My name was on the paperwork, but the signature looked slightly shaky, like someone signing while sick or half-conscious. Suddenly I remembered. 2 weeks earlier, I had been extremely ill with the flu. Ethan had stopped by to check on me. I remembered him placing papers on the kitchen table. Just some insurance forms, Mom, he had said. I barely had the strength to sit up. And apparently, I had signed them. My stomach twisted. Not because I was shocked, but because I realized how carefully Ethan must have planned this. I closed the laptop and picked up the phone. The first call I made was to Riverton Legal Services, the firm managing the trust. A woman answered. Good morning, Riverton Legal. My name is Margaret Lawson, I said. I need to confirm something about a property under the Lawson Family Trust. She placed me on hold briefly. When she returned, her voice sounded confused. Mrs. Lawson, according to our records, the property was not authorized for sale. My lips tightened. That's what I thought. There was a pause. May I ask why you're asking? Because my son just told me he sold it yesterday. Silence. Then the woman said quietly, I think you should speak with one of our attorneys immediately. That was the first phone call. The second call I made was to my bank. The fraud department representative sounded concerned. Mrs. Lawson, the transfers to Ethan Lawson total $139,200, she confirmed. Yes. Did you authorize those transactions? No. Another pause. Then we will begin a financial abuse investigation. The words hung heavily in the air. Financial abuse. I never imagined hearing those words connected to my own child. But the day wasn't finished surprising me. Around 5 that evening, Ethan called again. His voice sounded nervous this time. Mom, did the bank contact you? Yes. They're asking questions about the transfers. I'm not surprised. A tense silence filled the line. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. Mom, please don't cause problems right now. The wedding is tomorrow. Tomorrow. I almost laughed. Ethan, I said calmly, you stole my life savings and sold a house that isn't legally yours to sell. I had power of attorney. You had temporary access to one account. His breathing became heavier. Mom, Claire's parents are coming. The venue is paid. Everything is planned. And? Just, don't make a scene, okay? I stared at the family photos on the wall. Pictures of Ethan as a child. Birthday parties. School plays. His first baseball uniform. How did that little boy become the man threatening me on the phone? Finally, I spoke. I'll come to the wedding. Relief flooded his voice instantly. Good. Thank you, Mom. But before he could hang up, I added quietly. And Ethan, I hope you enjoy your special day. Of course I will. I ended the call. Then I looked down at the documents spread across my kitchen table. Fraud reports, bank statements, trust agreements, evidence. Tomorrow, my son would stand in front of friends and family believing he had won. Believing his mother was too weak to fight back. But what Ethan didn't realize was that by the time he said, I do, several people would already be investigating what he had done. And the buyers who thought they purchased my house? They were about to discover something that would turn Ethan's wedding celebration into absolute chaos. Because the moment those buyers tried to move in, they were going to learn the house was never his to sell. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, casting pale golden lines across the floor. For a moment, everything looked peaceful, like any other Sunday. But the calm didn't fool me. Today was my son's wedding. And somewhere beneath the flowers, music, and smiling faces, a storm was already forming. I dressed slowly, choosing a simple navy blue dress that Daniel had once said made my eyes look brighter. It had been years since I wore it. Looking at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because I looked different, but because something inside me had changed. By noon I was driving toward the wedding venue, a large countryside lodge just outside Riverton, surrounded by tall pine trees and wide green fields. The parking lot was already filling with cars. Elegant decorations covered the entrance, white roses, silk ribbons, a large wooden sign that read, Ethan and Claire, forever begins today. The words felt strangely ironic. Inside, the ceremony hall buzzed with excitement. Guests laughed, hugged, and chatted happily. No one knew what I knew, and that made everything feel surreal. Ethan spotted me almost immediately. Mom, he said, walking quickly toward me. He looked handsome in his charcoal suit, though there were faint shadows under his eyes. Maybe nerves. Or maybe guilt. He hugged me tightly. I'm really glad you came. Of course, I replied calmly. He studied my face for a moment, as if trying to read my thoughts. You're not upset, are you? I smiled politely. Today is your wedding day. Why would I ruin that? His shoulders relaxed slightly. Good. I knew you'd understand. Claire approached a moment later. Her white dress shimmered under the lights, and her smile looked flawless, like something from a magazine. Margaret, she said warmly. I'm so happy you made it. Her tone sounded friendly, but her eyes carried the same calculating look I remembered from dinner weeks ago. Congratulations, I said. She leaned closer, lowering her voice slightly. Ethan told me you helped with the condo down payment. That was incredibly generous. I held her gaze for a moment. Yes, I said slowly. Very generous. The ceremony began shortly after. Soft piano music filled the hall as guests took their seats. I sat quietly in the third row. From there, I could see everything. Claire walked down the aisle with perfect elegance. Ethan stood at the altar, smiling nervously. The officiant began speaking about love, trust, and lifelong commitment. The irony was almost painful. Then something unusual happened. About halfway through the ceremony, the large wooden doors at the back of the hall suddenly opened. Several guests turned around. Two strangers stood in the doorway, a man and a woman. They looked confused and slightly irritated. The man whispered something to an event coordinator standing nearby. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see the coordinator's expression slowly change from polite to alarmed. Moments later, she hurried out of the room with them. The ceremony continued, but I noticed Ethan glance nervously toward the doors. Maybe he felt it too. That quiet sense that something wasn't right. 5 minutes later, the doors opened again. This time, 3 more people entered. One of them was holding a folder of papers. They spoke urgently with the coordinator. Then they looked toward the altar. Toward Ethan. My son shifted uncomfortably. The officiant paused briefly, confused by the movement in the back. Claire frowned. "What's going on?" she whispered. No one answered. But I already knew. Those weren't random guests. They were the couple who believed they had purchased my house. And judging by the expressions on their faces, they had just discovered something very disturbing. Because when they checked the property records that morning, they learned the sale Ethan arranged was never legally valid, which meant the dream home they thought they bought didn't belong to them. And the man responsible was standing at the altar, about to say his wedding vows. But what happened next would shock every single person in that room. Because within minutes, someone else was about to arrive. Someone Ethan definitely wasn't expecting. And when they walked through those doors, my son's wedding day would begin turning into the worst day of his life. At first, most guests didn't notice the tension building in the back of the hall. They were too focused on the wedding, the music, the decorations, the smiling couple standing at the altar. But I noticed, because I had been waiting for it. The three people who had entered the room were now speaking urgently with the event coordinator near the doors. The man holding the folder kept pointing toward Ethan. His voice was low, but his body language was anything but calm. Frustrated, confused, angry. Meanwhile, the ceremony continued. The officiant smiled warmly as he spoke about love and partnership. Marriage, he said, is built on trust and honesty. Ethan shifted his weight slightly. Claire squeezed his hand. "Everything okay?" she whispered. "Yeah," Ethan murmured quickly. But his eyes kept drifting toward the back of the room. The man with the folder finally stepped forward, walking quickly toward the aisle. The coordinator tried to stop him. "Sir, please, this is a private ceremony." But the man shook his head. "No, we need answers now." A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd as several guests turned around to watch. The officiant stopped speaking. "Is there a problem?" he asked politely. The man stopped halfway down the aisle. "Yes," he said loudly. "There's a big problem." Every head in the room turned toward him, including Ethan's. The color slowly drained from my son's face. The stranger opened the folder in his hands and pulled out several documents. "We purchased a property yesterday," he said, his voice sharp with frustration. 214 Cedar Hollow Road. Murmurs spread across the room. That was my address. Claire frowned and looked at Ethan. "Wait, isn't that your mom's house?" Ethan didn't answer. The man continued. "We wired the down payment, signed the contract, and were told the house was legally sold." He lifted the papers. "But when we contacted the property management office this morning," his voice grew colder. "They informed us the property is owned by a legal trust." Guests began whispering. The man pointed directly at Ethan. "And according to them, the man who sold us the house had no legal authority to sell it." Silence flooded the room. Claire slowly turned toward Ethan. "What are they talking about?" Ethan swallowed hard. I can explain." But before he could say another word, the large wooden doors opened again. This time the room fell completely quiet. Two uniformed police officers stepped inside. Behind them walked a sharply dressed woman carrying a leather briefcase. I recognized her immediately. Laura Grant, the attorney from Riverton Legal Services. The same firm managing the Lawson Family Trust. The same trust Ethan had tried to bypass. The officers walked calmly down the aisle. Guests shifted nervously in their seats. Claire's face had gone pale. "Ethan," she whispered. "What is happening?" Laura Grant stopped a few feet from the altar. She opened her briefcase and removed several documents. "Mr. Ethan Lawson," she said firmly. "We've been notified of a potentially fraudulent property transaction involving trust-owned real estate." Ethan's hands were trembling now. "This isn't the time for this," he muttered. "Oh," Laura said calmly. "I believe it is." One of the officers stepped slightly forward. The entire wedding hall had fallen silent. Dozens of guests stared at Ethan. Claire slowly released his hand. "You told me the house was yours to sell," she said quietly. Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came out. And that's when the officer spoke. "Mr. Lawson, we need you to come with us to answer a few questions regarding a financial fraud report." Gasps echoed around the room. The officiant looked completely stunned. Claire took a step backward. "Fraud," she whispered. Ethan's eyes darted around the room desperately. Then they landed on me. For the first time all day, he looked truly afraid. Because at that moment, he finally understood something. His mother hadn't come to the wedding to forgive him. I had come to watch the truth unfold. But what happened next would shock everyone even more. Because the officer hadn't yet mentioned the $139,000 missing from my bank account. And when that information came out, Ethan's wedding wouldn't just be ruined. His entire future would collapse in front of everyone he knew. The room was so quiet you could hear someone breathing across the hall. Ethan stood frozen at the altar. The two police officers waited patiently beside him, their expressions calm but firm. They weren't raising their voices, and they weren't rushing him. They didn't need to. Everyone in the room already knew something serious was happening. Claire looked back and forth between Ethan and the officers, her confusion slowly turning into fear. "Ethan," she whispered again. "Tell me this is some kind of mistake." Ethan rubbed his forehead nervously. "It is," he said quickly. "There's just been a misunderstanding with the paperwork." The man who had entered earlier, the one holding the property documents, shook his head immediately. "A misunderstanding," he said sharply. "My wife and I transferred $300,000 yesterday because you told us the house was legally yours to sell." Gasps echoed through the room. Claire's eyes widened. "You sold your mother's house for $300,000? Ethan's face had gone pale. "It was supposed to be temporary," he said weakly. "I just needed the money for the condo until everything got sorted out." Laura Grant, the trust attorney, stepped forward. "That property is owned by the Lawson Family Trust," she explained calmly. "And the trust agreement clearly states that no individual family member can sell the property without trustee authorization." She lifted the documents in her hand. "No such authorization exists." The officer beside her nodded slightly. "Mr. Lawson, we're not placing you under arrest right now," he said. "But we do need you to come to the station to answer some questions about this transaction." Guests began whispering again. Phones were slowly appearing in people's hands as some quietly recorded the scene. Claire stared at Ethan as if seeing him for the first time. "You told me everything was handled," she said. "It was supposed to be," Ethan muttered. Then the officer asked the question that made Ethan visibly panic. "Mr. Lawson, we've also received a report from Riverton Credit Union regarding large financial transfers from Mrs. Lawson's personal account." Claire turned toward him again. "What transfers?" No one spoke for a moment. Then Laura Grant answered. "Approximately $139,000 was moved from Margaret Lawson's savings account to Mr. Lawson's personal account over the past week." Claire's hand slowly covered her mouth. "You took your mother's savings too?" Ethan's voice rose defensively. "I had power of attorney." I finally stood up. Every head in the room turned toward me. "Temporary access," I said calmly. "Not power of attorney." Ethan looked at me with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Mom, you signed those documents." "I signed something while I was sick," I replied quietly. "But those papers didn't give you permission to empty my life savings." Claire's face had turned ghost white. "You told me your mom helped us with the condo down payment," she said. Ethan avoided her eyes. "I was going to pay it back." "When?" she demanded. He had no answer. The officer gently placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Sir, we really should continue this conversation at the station." Ethan looked around the room desperately. His friends, Claire's parents, relatives. Everyone was staring. The perfect wedding he had imagined only hours earlier was completely destroyed. Claire slowly removed the engagement ring from her finger. The small diamond sparkled briefly under the lights. Then she placed it in Ethan's trembling hand. "I don't know who you are," she said quietly. And with that, she turned and walked down the aisle. Her white dress brushed softly against the floor as she passed the stunned guests. Ethan didn't follow her. He just stood there, holding the ring. The officer spoke again. "Mr. Lawson." Slowly. Ethan nodded and walked with them toward the exit. But as the doors opened and he stepped outside, he glanced back at me one last time. There was anger in his eyes. But there was also something else. Fear. Because he had finally realized something. The investigation had only just begun. And once the police started examining where the money had actually gone, they were going to discover something that would make this situation far worse. Something Ethan had been hiding from everyone, including the woman he was about to marry. And when that secret came out, even I wasn't prepared for what it would reveal. The wedding hall slowly emptied after Ethan left with the officers. Guests stood in small groups whispering to each other, stunned by what had just happened. Some people avoided looking at me. Others stared with quiet sympathy. Claire's parents left quickly without saying a word to anyone. I watched them disappear through the doors, their shoulders stiff with embarrassment. Within 30 minutes, the once beautiful ceremony hall looked like the aftermath of a storm. Half-empty chairs. Wilted flower petals scattered along the aisle. The large sign that read, "Forever Begins Today," now felt almost cruel. Laura Grant approached me while I was gathering my purse. "Mrs. Lawson," she said gently, "I'm very sorry you had to go through this." I nodded slowly. I never imagined it would happen this way either. She hesitated before continuing. "The police will likely contact you later today. They'll want your statement about the bank transfers." I expected that. We walked outside together. The afternoon air was cool, and the sky had turned a dull gray. Laura opened her briefcase again. "There's something else you should know," she said. I looked at her. "The fraud department at Riverton Credit Union contacted us earlier today," she continued. "They began tracing where the transferred money went." My stomach tightened. "And?" She handed me a printed report. At first, the funds were deposited into Ethan's personal account. That part one already knew. But the next line made my chest tighten. "Within 48 hours, she said carefully, most of the money was transferred again." "To where?" I asked. Laura pointed to the page. "Several different places." I scanned the report. $20,000 luxury furniture store. $12,000 jewelry retailer. $9,500 wedding venue payment. But one transaction stood out. $65,000 North Valley Medical Center. I frowned. "That's a hospital." "Yes." "For what?" Laura shook her head. "That's what the investigators are trying to determine." A strange uneasiness crept into my chest. Ethan had never mentioned any medical issue. He had always seemed healthy. Laura closed her briefcase. "The detectives may question you about this transfer," she said. "They'll want to know if Ethan ever mentioned hospital bills." "No," I said slowly. "Never." But something about the situation felt strange. Why would Ethan send such a large amount of money to a medical center? Later that evening, I finally returned home. The house felt unusually quiet. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to sit in the living room without turning on the television or radio. Just silence. Around 7 o'clock, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Lawson?" a calm male voice said. "Yes. My name is Detective Harris from the Riverton Police Department. We're investigating the financial complaint you filed earlier today." I took a deep breath. "Yes, Detective." "There's something we need to ask you," he continued. I could hear papers rustling on the other end of the line. "Your son transferred $65,000 to North Valley Medical Center 2 days ago." "I saw that on the report." "We contacted the hospital," he said, "and they confirmed the payment was made toward an ongoing treatment account." My confusion deepened. "Treatment for who?" There was a short pause. Then the detective spoke carefully. "For a patient listed under the name Lily Carter." The name meant nothing to me. "I don't know anyone by that name." "That's what we found unusual," he replied. "Because according to the hospital records, your son listed himself as the patient's legal guardian." My heart skipped a beat. Guardian? Yes. Another pause followed. Then the detective said something that made my entire body go cold. Mrs. Lawson, the patient is an 8-year-old girl. My mind raced. Ethan didn't have children. At least, none that I knew about. But the detective's next sentence changed everything. According to hospital paperwork, he said quietly, Lily Carter is listed as your son's daughter. The phone almost slipped from my hand. An 8-year-old granddaughter. A sick child. And Ethan had hidden her from me. But what shocked me even more was why he had hidden her in the first place. Because when the detectives finished investigating that hospital payment, they were about to uncover something far more disturbing than financial fraud. A secret Ethan had been hiding for nearly a decade. After Detective Harris ended the call, I sat on my couch for a long time without moving. An 8-year-old girl. My granddaughter. The thought echoed through my mind like a distant bell. Ethan had never mentioned a child. Not once. Not during our weekly phone calls, not during family dinners, not even when he brought Claire into our lives. Nothing. Which meant one of two things. Either the detective had made a mistake, or my son had been hiding something for years. The next morning, I barely slept. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang again. Detective Harris. Mrs. Lawson, he said, we've confirmed additional details about the hospital payment. I sat upright. And? The $65,000 your son transferred went toward chemotherapy treatments. My stomach dropped. Chemotherapy. Yes. The patient, Lily Carter, has been undergoing treatment for leukemia. For a moment, I couldn't speak. An 8-year-old child fighting cancer. And Ethan had used stolen money to pay for her treatment. The detective continued gently. The hospital confirmed Ethan has been listed as Lily's legal guardian for several years. Where's the girl's mother? I asked quietly. Deceased, he said. Car accident 3 years ago. The room felt suddenly smaller. Images rushed through my mind, Ethan disappearing for entire weekends, canceled family visits, vague explanations about work. How many times had he been visiting that hospital while I assumed he was simply busy? Does the child know about me? I asked. There was a pause. No, Detective Harris said. According to hospital staff, Ethan never mentioned any other family. A heavy silence filled the room. Then the detective spoke again. Mrs. Lawson, this information complicates the case. How? Your son still committed financial fraud. That part hasn't changed. I nodded slowly. But the investigators also have to consider that a significant portion of the money was used for medical care. I understood what he meant. It didn't erase the crime, but it changed the story. After the call ended, I sat by the window for a long time. Snow had begun falling lightly outside, covering the quiet street in soft white flakes. Somewhere across the city, an 8-year-old girl was lying in a hospital bed. My granddaughter. A child I had never met. A child who might have been fighting for her life. And my son, who had done something terrible, had also been trying to save her. By noon, I made a decision. I drove to North Valley Medical Center. The hospital lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Nurses moved quickly through the halls, and families sat quietly in waiting areas. I approached the reception desk. Hello, I said gently. I'm looking for a patient named Lily Carter. The receptionist checked her computer. Are you family? I hesitated. Then I answered honestly. I believe I'm her grandmother. The woman looked slightly surprised but nodded. She's in the pediatric oncology wing. Room 314. My heart pounded as I walked down the long hallway. Bright drawings decorated the walls, crayon rainbows, cartoon animals, colorful stars. Children's artwork. When I reached room 314, the door was slightly open. Inside, a small girl sat on the hospital bed wearing a soft blue blanket around her shoulders. Her hair was thin, clearly growing back after treatment. But her eyes looked exactly like Ethan's when he was a child. She was drawing something with colored pencils when she noticed me standing there. She tilted her head curiously. Hi, she said softly. I felt my throat tighten. Hello, I replied. She studied me for a moment. Then she asked the question that broke my heart. Are you one of my dad's friends? For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. Because I had come to the hospital believing my son had betrayed me completely. But now, I wasn't so sure anymore. And what I learned next from that little girl would change everything I thought I knew about my son. Because Ethan hadn't just been hiding a child. He had been hiding why he never asked me for help. And the truth behind that decision was far more painful than anything he had done with the money. The little girl on the hospital bed looked at me with curious, patient eyes. Are you one of my dad's friends? She asked again. For a moment, I struggled to find the right words. Then I slowly stepped inside the room. No, I said gently. I'm someone who cares about your dad. She seemed satisfied with that answer and returned to her drawing. Up close, I could see just how small she was. The blue blanket covered most of her thin shoulders, and a 4-line ran quietly from her arm to a nearby machine. What are you drawing? I asked softly. She lifted the paper proudly. It was a simple picture of a house. A small house with flowers in front and a bright yellow sun above it. That's the house my dad promised we'd live in someday, she said happily. My heart tightened. The one with the big tree in the yard. I swallowed slowly. Ethan must have been talking about Cedar Hollow Road, the house he had tried to sell. Your dad talks about it a lot? I asked. All the time, she said with a smile. He says once I get better, we'll live somewhere nice and normal. Something inside my chest cracked open. Ethan hadn't been planning a vacation home. He had been planning a place for his daughter to recover. A quiet place. A safe place. Just then, a nurse stepped into the room. She stopped when she saw me. Oh, she said politely. Are you visiting Lily? Yes, I replied. The nurse smiled kindly. She's been doing very well this week. Lily looked proud of herself. I finished my medicine yesterday. The nurse nodded. She's been incredibly brave. After checking Lily's 4-line, the nurse stepped closer to me. Are you family? She asked quietly. I hesitated. Then I answered the way my heart felt. I believe I am. The nurse's expression softened. Her father has been here almost every night for months. Every night? I asked. Yes. He usually sleeps in the chair beside the bed. She gestured to the small recliner in the corner of the room. The chair looked worn from use. He rarely talks about himself, the nurse continued. But it's obvious he's been under a lot of pressure. I nodded slowly. He never mentioned his daughter to me. The nurse looked slightly surprised. He probably didn't want to worry you. Maybe. Or maybe he didn't want me to know the truth about how desperate he had become. Before leaving, the nurse added something that made my heart sink. Lily's treatments have been extremely expensive. I saw the payment records, I said quietly. She nodded. Without those payments, we wouldn't have been able to continue certain therapies. That meant Ethan's stolen money had literally been paying for Lily's survival. When the nurse left, Lily looked back at me. My dad says when I'm healthy again, we're going to have a dog, she said. A big fluffy one. That sounds wonderful, I replied. She tilted her head curiously. You look like my dad. I smiled softly. Do I? Yeah, she said thoughtfully. You have the same eyes. My throat tightened again. Because she was right. She had Daniel's eyes. My husband's eyes. Which meant this child truly was my granddaughter. A few minutes later I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, familiar footsteps. Then Ethan appeared in the doorway. He froze the moment he saw me standing beside Lily's bed. Shock spread across his face. Mom? Lily looked between us, confused. You two know each other? Ethan stepped slowly into the room, his eyes filled with panic. How did you find this place? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at him carefully. For the first time since the wedding disaster, I saw something different in my son's face. Not arrogance. Not anger. Just exhaustion. And fear. Ethan, I said quietly. You have a daughter. He looked at Lily, then back at me. Yes. His voice barely rose above a whisper. And you never told me. His shoulders slumped slightly. I didn't think you'd forgive me. For what? I asked. He hesitated. Then he said something that completely stunned me. For the reason Lily exists in the first place. My heart pounded. What do you mean? Ethan looked at the floor. Then he said the words that revealed the final secret he had been hiding for nearly a decade. And the truth was something I never expected to hear. Because Lily's mother wasn't just someone from Ethan's past. She was someone whose life had been destroyed by a mistake my son made years ago. And when I learned what that mistake was, I finally understood why Ethan believed I would never forgive him. Ethan stood in the hospital doorway, looking like a man who had been carrying a heavy secret for far too long. Lily watched us both with curious eyes. Dad, she said softly, is this your friend? Ethan hesitated. Then he looked at me again. No, he said quietly. This is your grandmother. Lily's eyes widened with surprise. Really? She looked back at me, studying my face again as if trying to see the resemblance more clearly. Grandma? The word hit me harder than I expected. I walked closer and gently touched her small hand. Yes, I said softly. I'm your grandmother. Lily smiled shyly. I always wanted one. My chest tightened. Ethan rubbed his face tiredly. I never planned for you to find out like this, he said. I turned to him. Then tell me the truth now. He nodded slowly. Lily returned to her drawing while Ethan stepped into the hallway with me. The corridor was quiet except for the distant hum of hospital machines. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he finally spoke. Lily's mother was named Emily Carter. The name meant nothing to me. We met when I was 22, he continued. She was working at a cafe near the college. His voice carried deep regret. We dated for almost a year. What happened? I asked gently. Ethan looked down. I made a stupid decision. He paused before continuing. One night I was driving us home after a party. I had been drinking, not enough to feel drunk, but enough to slow my reaction time. My stomach tightened. A truck ran a red light, he said quietly. I swerved to avoid it, and we crashed into a guardrail. The memory clearly still haunted him. I walked away with a broken arm. And Emily? I asked softly. She suffered serious injuries. My chest grew heavy. She survived, he added quickly. But the doctors later discovered complications. Complications? Ethan swallowed. She was pregnant. The words hung between us. And the accident caused long-term health problems. The pregnancy was extremely difficult. I felt the pieces slowly falling together. She had Lily, Ethan continued, but her health kept getting worse. What about her family? I asked. They blamed me, he said quietly. And honestly, they had every right to. 3 years ago, Emily died in another accident. After that, Ethan became Lily's only guardian. I wanted to tell you, he said. So many times. Then why didn't you? He looked at me with painful honesty. Because everything that happened started with my mistake. He shook his head. I didn't want you to see me as the man who destroyed someone's life. Tears blurred my vision. Ethan, I said quietly, we all make mistakes. But this one followed Lily for the rest of her life. His voice cracked. That's why I worked so hard to pay for her treatment. That's why I needed money so desperately. I understood now. The stolen money. The desperate property sale. The lies. None of it had come from greed. It had come from fear. Fear of losing the one person he still had left. I took a deep breath. Ethan, I said softly. The police investigation is still happening. I know. But Lily needs stability. He nodded silently. And that means we have to fix this the right way. Ethan looked up. What do you mean? I placed my hand on his shoulder. You're still responsible for what you did, I said firmly. But Lily is my granddaughter. Emotion filled his eyes. You're willing to help? I smiled gently. We're family. Later that evening, I returned to Lily's room. She looked up happily. Grandma, she said. Yes. Will you come visit me again tomorrow? I squeezed her hand. Of course I will. Because in the end, the story wasn't about money. It wasn't about betrayal. And it wasn't even about the wedding that never happened. It was about something far more important. A broken family finding its way back together. And an 8-year-old girl who reminded us both that sometimes the hardest mistakes in life can still lead to something worth fighting for.